I'm Brian Ahearn, Chief Influence Officer at Influence People. During the show today, you're going to learn about the difference between influence and manipulation. You're going to learn about how important it is to build a relationship, especially if you're in sales. And you're going to learn about 7 principles of persuasion. The question I'd like to leave you with is this: do you really like the people that you interact with?
Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today, my guest is Brian Ahearn. Brian is Chief Influence Officer at Influence People, and he's also a faculty member at the Cialdini Institute. So, Brian, could you give us about 90 seconds on how you got here and what your history is?
Sure. I came across the work of Dr. Robert Cialdini more than 20 years ago, completely by chance. Somebody gave a videotape where he had presented at Stanford University. I was enthralled with the research he was talking about. I love the fact that it was research-based, that he emphasized that we could do it in an ethical way. And I began to utilize the video in training, saw the results. We can talk about it more later if you want to, but how I came in contact with him. Bottom line is I've been a certified trainer of his for more than 15 years. More than 6 years ago, I left my corporate job to do this full time because I'm so passionate about it. I truly believe that if people understand how to ethically influence others, they can enjoy much more professional success and personal happiness.
Excellent. So can we start with some definitions, because then we all know what we're talking about. Let's start with defining influence first.
Influence, I would say, is the umbrella that covers a number of ways that we can get people to change their behavior or thinking. We sometimes talk about persuasion. What are things that we do before we even attempt to persuade somebody? Then there's persuasion, the things that we do in the moment. There can be post-persuasion, what we do after to maybe set up the next moment. And under the umbrella of influence, there's all kinds of things. People can use force, coercion, money, but we very specifically talk about persuasion and then ethical persuasion. So the definition that I use when it comes to persuasion is the one that Aristotle had put out. He said persuasion was the art of getting somebody to do something they wouldn't ordinarily do if you didn't ask. And if you think about that, Marcus, it's a great definition, right? Somebody's not doing what you want or need them to do, and how we communicate might make all the difference between hearing yes and hearing no. So at a high level, that's how I look at influence, and then more specifically persuasion.
In sales, we very often see a lot of emphasis on trying to create urgency. And creating false urgency, in my experience, sends my brain rattling off into thinking, well, why are they trying to push me down this rabbit hole? And I'm not really very comfortable with this, so I'd rather shut down. So I'd like to understand the nuance there as you see it.
So when we talk about what does it take to be an ethical influencer, somebody who is not just out for themselves, who is not going to say or do anything to get you to say yes. An ethical influencer, there's 3 things that are must-haves. First is truthfulness. I always tell the truth, but it's not enough that I just tell the truth. I never hide the truth either. So as an example, Marcus, if you were going to buy my home, I've lived in this home for 35 years. We love it. I have a gym down in my basement, and I've got carpet down there. There is a crack in the basement. If you bought my home and moved that carpet and saw that crack, you'd probably say, hey, Brian, why didn't you tell me about the crack in the basement? For me, for me to say, Marcus, you didn't ask, is indefensible. What I learned through the ethical influence process is I can bring up shortcomings and be honest about that and actually gain credibility as somebody who is an honest individual. So if I saw that you really were enjoying this house and I said, hey, Marcus, come here, I want to show you something. We go downstairs, you see my gym. I got a carpet here. It just makes the room a little bit nicer. I move it and I say, here's a crack. And Marcus, I've lived here for 35 years. Never once has this leaked, but I would not want you to think I was trying to hide something. You're probably thinking at that point, hey, this guy Brian, pretty honest broker, and you'll probably continue to find your reasons you like the house. So I always tell the truth and I don't hide the truth. The second thing is I only use what we call principles of persuasion that are natural to the situation. So you mentioned earlier about a false sense of scarcity. I don't tell you, hey, Marcus, I got to let you know 3 other people looked at the house yesterday when they didn't really do that. Now, that's also breaking the truthfulness, but it's specific to the psychology, because I know that that's going to create this sense of urgency in you that's going to make you want it. I only use the principles that are naturally available in the situation that I'm in. And then the third thing, which gets to the word get, I look to create situations that are not just good for me, but also good for you. Stephen Covey would have said win-win. I like to put it this way: good for you, good for me, then we're good to go, right? If you leave the transaction feeling better off, and I've got self-interest in it, that's probably why I'm trying to influence your behavior. But if you leave feeling better off and I'm better off too, then I can feel good about how I have communicated with you to try to get to that position.
You've redeemed yourself completely, and it was with that final statement, which is good for you, good for me, good to go. The key is the syntax, because I win first projects to the buyer's brain that I have my self-interest first. And let's be honest about it, the brain has evolved in an environment that was quite dangerous. We had to make quick decisions that could even be life or death, in an environment that was largely trying to kill us, in an environment where the other people were also could not be trusted. And I don't think the brain has really moved that far on. And if we don't start with that basic premise that the channel is the human brain, and if we do not create the conditions for that, for our brain to feel safe, then we will project that to the other person's brain. And so not lying, not admitting, means we don't have that cognitive dissonance going on in the background that's there. I can't quite put my finger on. I'm fascinated by how you harness that positively.
Well, I always tell audiences, and they laugh, but they know this is true. I say, you all have BS meters, right? You can tell when somebody really likes you.
Yeah.
Look in the eye, tone of voice, body language, all of these things in an instant are giving you a sense of, does this person really like me and care for me? Do I trust this individual? So one of the things for me that it is the foundation of influence and persuasion is the principle of liking. And I say it's the foundation because the clients I work with are still in relational transactions. So this principle of liking says, Marcus, it's easier for you to say yes to me if you know me and like me. Everybody gets that, right? In fact, people roll their eyes like, come on, this is common sense. To which I reply, unfortunately, common sense is uncommon too often. But here's the thing. It's not about me getting you to like me. The things that will cause you to like me, for example, we find out we have things in common, went to the same university, lived in the same town, whatever, those naturally cause you to like me. Or if I pay you a genuine compliment, you feel good, the endorphins are flowing, you feel like, hey, I like this guy, Brian.
Having my name on in the background.
Yeah, I mean, I practice what I preach. But the thing is, all of that's working on me. The more I get to know you and things that we have in common, or if I see good things and I compliment them, I am coming to like you. And that's the key difference, is because that's what you start to sense. Hey, this guy Brian really seems to be genuine. He seems to really care about my interest in this particular interaction. That's what begins to open you up. And the other good news is, the more I get to know and like you, and I consider you friend, I would not take advantage of my friends. I would not manipulate them. I wouldn't lie to them to get them to do things. And so employing this principle the right way all but removes manipulation from the equation, to where I can have more authentic conversations with you. And even if you say no to what I'm proposing, it's different. It's not a transactional, it's still relational, because you're saying, I trust Brian. He just doesn't fully know all my needs, and this isn't going to work for me, but I'm going to be happy to talk to him again.
Fantastic. And again, this is backed up by Marcus Buckingham's research, Gallup, in his book, The One Thing You Need to Know. Yeah, what's really key here is human beings, especially in times of high uncertainty, are looking for trust. They're looking for their tribe. And when we are operating in a very uncertain time, and let's face it, at the moment, things are pretty uncertain. There's a lot of volatility. There's a lot of forced, unwanted change that is coming down. It's surprising people. And this is off the back of the lockdown and COVID and the 2008 crisis. There's been a lot going on in people's minds that have kept them in a high level of stress and uncertainty for a long, prolonged period. And we have to meet our buyers and our employees and our partners and our suppliers where they are. And complaining that they're unreasonable or irrational seems to be a hiding to nothing. So help me understand how we can utilize these skills, these principles, to better understand context and why people do what they do, so that we're not just looking baffled and confused.
Let me share a quick story about the irrational. Many, many years ago, my wife told me one day, she said, yesterday when I was working out, I felt like this explosion in the back of my head. She said, I've never felt anything like that before, and it scared me. But it went away, and I didn't think anything of it until it happened again the next day. And so we called a friend who's an ER doctor, and he said, yeah, you should probably go to the ER. And we go there, and we meet with the doctor. And my wife tells the doctor, she said, yeah, this is what happened. And it scared me because my brother had brain surgery because he had an aneurysm. Now the doctor is really concerned about potential family history. We have some conversation. He leaves the room. Jane calls her sister-in-law and said, "Hey, what happened to Carl last year? Was it an aneurysm?" And she said, "No, no, no, not an aneurysm." She said he fell down and he hit his head. He had a brain swell, so they had to do the surgery to relieve the swelling and stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay. Doctor comes back and we say, um, it wasn't an aneurysm. It was subdermal hematoma. And he stood there and he just shook his head and he said, "I can't get the aneurysm out of my mind, and I think we should do these tests." I said, "Now wait a minute, let me ask you, if we had never mentioned aneurysm, would you be suggesting those tests?" And he said, "No, I wouldn't, but I can't get it out of my mind." Now, Marcus, I was smart enough. I wasn't gonna, try to convince my wife not to do the test. She was scared, and so we just followed his lead. But I obviously never forgot that because doctors are supposed to be among the most rational decision makers, and he clearly was making a decision that wasn't rational. Now, I share that story just to let all of your listeners know every person you deal with, to one degree or another, is irrational. They're far more irrational than they want to believe. And we, as people who are influencing others, have to understand that. We can't mold them into the people that we want them to be. We deal with them as the people that they are. And what we learn about these principles of influence is when you use them skillfully, they operate the vast majority of the time at the subconscious level. They tap into that mammalian brain that you're talking about that has guided us, over the course of millennia to survive as a species. And so we don't have to hit people over the head with these big, advertisements and things. Sometimes just the subtle mention of certain things begins to change how people think. Example, when I'm working with insurance agents, which is my target market, I always encourage them, if you're trying to get somebody to take an action that's going to be in their best self-interest in terms of their insurance protection, it's never a bad thing to suddenly drop in your experience. And so I might say, Marcus, I've been doing this now for more than 20 years. And something I found works really well for clients who are in your position is, and I just go on, I'm just having this natural conversation. But as I learn how to drop these principles in along the way, all of that is working on your subconscious and kind of moving you in a positive direction that ultimately will be in your benefit to have the right insurance protection.
So can you explain what those principles are? So just give us a quick checklist so that we understand them.
Sure. Three principles especially good for building relationship. Liking, right? If you
Yep.
like me, it's easier to say yes. Unity. If we go deeper than liking, if we find out that we have some kind of common bond, we tend to be much more receptive to people that we have unity with, even if we don't necessarily like them that much. I mean, think about family. We have some family members we may not like nearly as much as some of our friends, but we'll probably give them a kidney before we'll do it for a friend because that's we're just genetically wired. And then reciprocity, right? I do something kind for you, you feel a sense of obligation to do something in return. If we engage those three principles the right way, it can help build relationship. Now, we may have solid relationship, but people aren't sure what to do. They're in that state of uncertainty. A couple of principles really good here. One is authority. We naturally follow the lead of people that we see as having expertise or wisdom. And so by making sure that your expertise is out in front of you, it makes it easier for people to say yes. And then there's social proof. What are other people doing, especially like me? People like to push back on this, but the reality is we are a herd instinct is within us. We learned over the millennia we're safer together than we are alone. And so we tend to make decisions that go along that conform with people that are similar to ourselves. Now, you may have people that you have a great relationship, they're not unsure what to do, you just got to motivate some action. And we have two final principles here. Consistency. People tend to feel better about themselves and they look better to other people when they keep their word, when they live in alignment with what they say and what they've previously done. And then the final one that you mentioned early on is scarcity. We value things more when we believe they're rare or going away. By tapping into these two principles, it can cause that sense of urgency for people to take action. So that's the high level.
So fantastic and extremely helpful. I'd like to just emphasize a point. We don't need to create false urgency if we understand our customer and their context, because if we are right for them and they are right for us, they will have the catalyst for change that already exists within their ecosystem, within their business, their environment. And it's our responsibility to then be able to help shine a light on them. Our job is not to convince. Our job is to facilitate the right decision for them, not for us. The outcome for us is a byproduct of them getting the outcome that they are renting by hiring our service or our product. And we have to get out of the idea that selling is about pushing a product or convincing people because no one in the history of humanity has or ever will bought your product, your service. They always rent an outcome. If you've got an elderly relative that has to come and live with you, and it means you have to sacrifice your convertible 5-liter sports car, and you have to get a car with side doors and a ramp, because your context has changed, your adoption rate, your love of the vehicle is going to be no less. It's just not fit for your current purpose. So again, one of the things that I see very often with people who talk about persuasion and sales is that you can control the customer. Do you mind if we just put a nail in that particular coffin?
Sure. There's always a dynamic. So if we just use business as the example, again, the industry I work primarily with is insurance. If I were an insurance agent, I would not rely on just hearing what you want and then trying to supply that. What you want may be a good foundation, but I also have this experience in having insured hundreds or thousands of people where I can speak to where you may have gaps. So we need to have a conversation that informs you about certain things. Then you get to make the decision. I hear what you're saying, Brian, but no, I don't want to get the umbrella coverage, or I don't want to increase my limits, but you've been informed. I can have a better conversation by tapping into these principles, because what I don't want to do is go into a situation and say, Marcus, I've been an insurance agent for 20 years and here's what you need. I don't know that until I have that conversation with you. I don't know about your budget and all kinds of things. But I do have this experience that says, I think I understand what you might need, but I need to have a conversation. I'm going to modify some of what I originally thought. But ultimately, the goal being to put you in a position that should something bad happen, you're not financially devastated by it. So again, there's this tension between what you may think you want and what I think I know. And we have this conversation to meet somewhere in the middle so that ultimately it's good for you and it's good for me. And that's why we're good to go. So does that help?
It does. What I'm very curious about, though, as we look at something like insurance, and I'm going to deviate from persuasion a little bit and really focus on sales and a genuine communication. When people are buying insurance, they're not buying insurance, they're buying something else. What is the job that people hire insurance for?
It would ultimately be, and they may not verbalize this, but peace of mind, that they don't have to go to bed and worry about something happening and financially ruining them. God forbid if something happens to their home, they know that they're going to be able to have their home rebuilt because an insurance company has backed that up for them. Or if they wreck their new car, that they're going to be able to get that new car because an insurance company has made that promise. So I think it's a peace of mind. I don't have to worry about this anymore. I can focus on other things that are competing for my time and attention.
And what fascinates me is how little time sellers spend on focusing on what peace of mind means to that customer and what they need to achieve it. And instead, they spend their time trying to convince. How can we ensure that people walk away from listening to this conversation and they stop sabotaging themselves by focusing on the wrong end of the problem?
Well, I think the first thing is they have to recognize that in the midst of the conversation that we've had, that they don't always know what's best for the other person. The more they know that person, they may have a much better idea of what they think could be best, but they'll never fully know, because here's the reality. The person you're talking to doesn't even fully know what they want or why they want it. A good conversation can help surface that, almost like a counselor helping you come to some realizations you may not have known before. Having a good salesperson who understands their product or service and has a good sense of the other individual, but has a conversation that can bring to the surface some maybe unmet needs that you didn't even realize were there, that's what's going to ultimately help them be a lot more valuable for their clients.
I've been spending a lot of time working on understanding questioning and what works, what jars, and so on. And something that I've come to realize is some of my favorite questions create contrast between what's possible and what we previously believed was possible. They move us forward, so they're empowering, and we gain a sense of agency just through the question. But my favorite part is that they cause us to betray the thing that's holding us back or the better future we claim we want. I'm curious how, within the framework of persuasion, you develop questions in order to serve the other person and actually move them forward instead of, because in my world, there's an awful lot of focus on pain, pain, pain equals dollar, dollar, dollar. First of all, it's quite tired. And most of them are quite aware of their pain, and just rubbing salt in the wound seems a little bit cruel and possibly even self-harming. So I'm interested, how do we create amazing questions that actually move people forward and
Well,
get them to think?
this taps into that principle of consistency, right? You are more likely to make choices that are in alignment with choices you've previously made, things that you said, things that you've done, what it is that you value, etc. So I, in a conversation with you, if I'm a salesperson in that conversation, I need to be asking questions to uncover what you've said, what you've done, what you value, what you believe, all of those kinds of things to inform me so I get to know you better, but also then to hopefully show you how what I offer aligns with what it is that you want. And I use a graphic a lot of times where I live in Columbus, Ohio, over here in the United States, and there's an outer belt that goes around Columbus. And I used to work downtown. It was a 15-minute drive straight down Interstate 71. If my wife had called or texted at the end of the day and said, "Hey, can you stop at the store and pick up something?" If that store was right along Interstate 71, it's a no-brainer, right? I'm already driving that way to go home, I'll hop off. But if the store that she asked me to go to was at Easton, which meant I had to go way out on the outer belt, I was less likely to do it. And I might start rationalizing, well, I was going to go there Friday for dinner with Jane. We'll just get it Friday. Or I was going to go to Barnes and Noble with Abigail on Saturday. I'll just get it Saturday morning. I don't want to go out of my way unless I've got a really solid excuse to do so. So that's really what we're looking for when we're asking these questions to uncover what people believe, value, set, etc. If we align with that straight line, like me going home on Interstate 71, that makes it cognitively easy for you to say yes. But if I'm going to propose things that take you way out of the way you've done things in the past, not so likely that you're going to probably say yes to that.
So, what is it that you see people do on a regular basis that create cognitive dissonance in the other person's brain and cause them to either hesitate, resist, or be suspicious or uncertain?
I think the biggest thing is to launch into a sales pitch when they don't even really know that individual or that organization. They may have gone through training, they may have experience, and so again, they think they know what's best for that person. But I've had that happen before where somebody launches in and I'm thinking, you haven't even asked me very many questions to understand where I'm at, you know? So I think that's the biggest thing is people get so anxious, excited, whatever, to dive into that conversation that it just is a monologue. And we see this all the time. I'm sure you have this a lot. People reach out to connect on LinkedIn. I will connect with virtually anybody. I've done LinkedIn learning courses, and I don't want to not connect with somebody who just took one of my courses. And I know that most people don't put in the reason, so I always respond back, "Hey, thanks for reaching out. I'd be happy to connect. I'm curious. How did you find me?" Right? A lot of times they say, "Took your LinkedIn learning courses." Great. But I can't tell you how many times, Marcus, people launch into, "I help people 10x, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, I can't believe that you're actually doing this. I mean, if I had known you were going to do this, I wouldn't have accepted the request. But that's what I'm talking about. They just think that what they're doing applies to everybody and they're shotgunning their approach. And it's terrible. It's a turnoff.
In their defense, and I'm not defending the activity, I think that is a cultural thing, because we've grown up in the era where it was considered okay to throw a lot of mud at the wall in the hope that some of it sticks. But if you do the mathematics, it's woefully wasteful. I mean, about 98 to 99.5% of all marketing spend and effort is wasted just trying to get people to speak to your salespeople. If you are running finance or health and safety, I suspect you'd be in jail quite quickly if you had a track record that poor. Okay, so this then speaks to another couple of really interesting points. When salespeople they're in that persuasion and they're trying to create the conditions where someone will let them over the moat, under the portcullis, through the courtyard with arrows pointed at them, and into the keep, and then into the hearth for a moment of intimacy. We've got to create the conditions where people feel safe. And we can't blame the other person for not getting it. We can't blame the other person for buying from someone else when they felt unsafe with our solution.
Right.
So can we spend a little bit of time maybe holding up the mirror and some questions that we could ask ourselves to see whether or not we're even worthy to be in front of a buyer in the first place?
Let me say this first about persuasion. And Cialdini defines it this way. It's arranging for an audience to be receptive to your message before they encounter it, right? we can ask the same thing, and there's a lot of things that are variables that can affect it. I like to say this: work, worship, work out. You're the same human being, Marcus, in all three places, but you could be a very different person, right? You may be a head down, super focused person at work. Where you worship, you might be quiet and a little more reserved. And then where you work out, you could be like aggressive and chatty. So I could ask you the very same question in all three places and get very different answers, right? That's one example. A great example, a personal example of utilizing persuasion was when I asked my wife to marry me. In the details, but I had been an idiot and was on again, off again, and she had told me she'd never go out with me again. Yet I'm feeling like I want to marry this girl, and so what I did on her birthday, I sent her a dozen roses at work. I had asked her if I could take her to dinner, and she had agreed. So I showed up at her apartment with another dozen roses, a bottle of wine. When we get ready to leave, we go downstairs, and I had rented a Rolls Royce and chauffeur to take us to dinner. We drove to downtown Columbus, tallest building in the city at the time, overlooking the city skyline for dinner. And in the back of the Rolls on the ride home, I popped the question, and she said yes. I could have asked her to marry me at work in the break room, and I'm certain she would have said no. But I set the stage romantically, and it made it much, much easier for her to say yes. Now, everybody gets that. Everybody understands romance. We need to take that same thought process into our clients. How can I set the stage to make it cognitively easier for that person when I get to the point where there's going to be some influence that's needed, that they are mentally in a space that is more likely to get a yes from them, right? That's what persuasion is all about. And most people never think about it.
Okay, would it be too much of a leap to say that what you do is you just act with love?
Always, I think, always having that person's best interest, which for me, that's what love is
Yeah.
putting somebody else's best interest above your own. By going in with that, people can sense when somebody is authentic and sincere and cares about them, all of that. So certainly working on ourselves. Another example of how I do this, on my iPod, I have a playlist called Jane, and I have one called Abigail. I play those songs when I'm going to spend time with either of them to mentally change how I am by the time I get there and I can interact with them. We can take the same thought process about how we're going to interact with our clients. What do I need to do before I step into this meeting so that I am truly thinking about their best welfare, that I am authentic, that I come across sincere? Because people will pick up on that. So we can persuade the situation, but we can also persuade ourselves.
Again, the echoes of what we teach as well in there. You have to understand who your customer is, the world that they occupy, what it's like to live and breathe and be them, where they are in their life, where they are in their funding cycle, what their burn rate is, what their competitive landscape is, because that's the world that they occupy. And if you don't meet them there and you treat them like economists do, and let's be honest, most economists were put on the planet to make soothsayers look good, the idea that human beings are rational, I mean, whoever came up with that idea, you can't reduce how human beings behave in the moment, in context, to some set of numbers on a balance sheet. That's not how it works either. So, as an owner or a seller or anyone operating in a business, one of the things that I think is critical is to understand the context in which you operate, but to spend your time focusing on self-mastery, understanding what makes you tick, what drives you, what triggers you, what your red flags are, where your boundaries and tolerances are, because how you respond in the moment will be defined by how well prepared you are. So I do eventually come back to make the point. And it's that level of preparation, the thinking about the journey your customer is going to go through 3 years from now, when they're at their third renewal, and they're saying, thank goodness we picked you. Best decision we ever made. Here's to the next 3 years. What do we have to do to create those conditions?
Well, your self-mastery brings up a quote from Ben Franklin where he said there are three things that are extremely hard: steal a diamond, and to know oneself. Um, we like to think that we do, but how often are we doing things like, why did I do that? I said I wanted to lose weight, but I ate the cake. I mean, uh, so getting to know and understand ourselves is critically important, because if we don't know how we're presenting ourselves to the world. We may think we're happy-go-lucky and people see us as, stick in the mud or something like that. So critically important that we work on that just throughout our lifetime. We're all self-discovery for a lifetime. I think that if we do that and we begin to understand how we respond, we can make choices. And I'll give you an example of making a different choice. When I was new to Twitter, I had messaged about half a dozen people and said, hey, I wrote a new blog post. It'd mean a lot to me if you promoted it with your followers. Well, I had one guy come back in the public space and he said, don't DM me to ask me to promote your stuff. If it's good, I will. And if it's not, I won't. Pound tacky, pound unfollow. So he's telling everybody this guy's tacky, don't follow him. Now, Marcus, I will tell you, everything in me wanted to reach through the internet and grab him by the throat and snap his neck. It pissed me off. But I took a breath and I said, you know what? I need to practice what I preach. So I put a message out and I said, hey, sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I'm new to Twitter, still trying to figure this out. And he came back and said, you know, aren't we all new to Twitter or something like that? And then shortly afterwards, he comes back and says, hey, Brian's actually a good guy. You should give him a follow. So he put that out in the public space. I replied and said, I really appreciate that. If you're ever down in Columbus, I'd love to meet up for coffee or a beer. He said, hey, I'm going to be down there on Thursday. So we got together and he was so apologetic. He's like, I don't know why I responded that way. He goes, I'm embarrassed. And I said, don't worry about it. And we ended up having a nice time. Well, now, that was maybe 10 years ago, we have lunch every quarter. And he still kind of jokes about, like, he's a pastor now. And he's like, I can't believe that I was that way with you. And I said, you know what? I'm happy you were, because I learned something about myself, but we are friends because of it. If you would have just passed on my information like I was asking, we probably wouldn't be sitting here and having conversations. So my point, Marcus, is I didn't respond to how I felt in the moment. I was able to just take that brief moment to recognize I could choose how to respond. And by doing so, I've made a wonderful friend.
Well, first of all, fantastic story. Second thing is, therein lies the difference between reacting and choosing your response. If you choose to structure these moments, they can all be prepared for. I mean, one of the things that I've spent the last 4 years doing, because I saw the chaos coming, and so I've designed everything that I do for a period of massive volatility, uncertainty, change, and to cut through the noise. And what's fascinating is, despite all of that, you can do more in 90 minutes by not doing the things that harm you and not letting this noise take over your mind, than most people can do in a 14-hour day, stuck and glued to their machines. And more often than not, it's down to that inner narrative, the story we tell ourselves. A great lesson that I learned is that the story we tell ourselves is the difference between stagnation and transformation. Let's spend a little bit of time on the inner narrative and how that's part of the ecosystem.
Oh, I love the timeliness of your question, because just before we got online, I mentioned our first grandchild came into the world. Somebody gave me, it's called a grandfather's journal, and it has all these questions. And I thought, you know what, I'm not going to sit down and write all these out. But I thought, how cool would it be if I get online and record videos for Emmett that he can watch when he gets older? So one of the questions today was, what would you want your grandchild to know about the world? And what I told him was that every day, every single day, there are wonderful things that happen in life, like his birth on the 14th of March. But there are also a lot of people who lost loved ones on the 14th of March, 2025. And for them to look back and say it was a horrible day, but it was just a day. It was the same sunrise, sunset. It was a day. What we choose, or how we choose to look at those things, there's going to be wonderful things in every day, and there's going to be terrible things happening every day. And we will have a choice as to what we will focus on. There are wonderful aspects of almost every person. There are things that are bad about every person. I love my wife. If I focus on what she does that bothers me, I'll be pissed off. But I choose to focus on the things that I love about her. And even to the point where one day she was feeling kind of down, a little bit blue, and she said, you only love me because you make yourself think positive thoughts about me. And I laughed and I said, you know what, if love is a choice, then isn't that a good thing, right? I could choose to look at the bad, but I choose to look at the good. This isn't dependent on just how I feel in the moment. And I think that applies to all of life. We can choose to look for the good in a situation rather than the bad. It's natural for us to look to the bad because it's going to harm us, and safety and all of those other things that we've talked about. But we can make that choice to look for the good. And when we do that, and how it impacts us personally, that begins to impact the people that we are around in a positive way.
So this speaks to a couple of simple truths. You can prepare for predictable moments, and you can practice those moments. You can develop a strategy, a checklist. You can rehearse them, and they are guaranteed to happen in life. You are going to be asked to do things that you don't want to do. And learning how to say no gracefully is a skill that can be practiced. You might get it wrong a few times, but once you've got it right, then you can build on that. And you're going to be asked, in sales, especially now, you're probably going to be asked by your bosses to put a customer who is not ready to buy under pressure. How are you going to handle that moment? And how are you going to neutralize your boss trying to get you to close it when you know, first of all, if you do, you'll piss off the customer. Secondly, they'll probably rinse you for a massive discount. And if you waited, you could make 3 times as much if you're a little bit patient.
Mhm.
And all you're doing is trying to satisfy a number that will be out of date by supper time.
This brings to mind a story about my daughter. And there's dual learning here because it was learning for me, but it was learning for her. She had gone to a summer camp, I think she was 12 years old, and I got the story firsthand from my wife because she was there. She and all these kids were sitting around, they're having lunch. If they don't finish all their food, they have to stand up and sing. Counselor says, hey, you guys didn't finish your food, you got to stand up and sing. My daughter didn't like singing, so she stood up, but she didn't sing. Counselor points her out and says, you didn't sing, and lets everybody else sit down. Now she's singling her out. She goes, I'm going to get you to sing. And my daughter goes, I don't like to sing. And she goes, I'll get you to sing. And she goes, no, you won't. And a battle of wills ensued, and my daughter wouldn't give in. Finally, her friends stood up and they said, we'll sing with you. And she said, no, I don't like singing, and I'm not going to sing. So she comes home. My wife tells me the story, and we're in the car driving somewhere. And I said, Abigail, Mom told me what happened to camp. And I think she thought she was going to get in trouble. And I said, I'm really proud of you. She said, why? And I said, because you need to learn to say no. If you don't, people will take advantage of you in life. Um, so I'm proud that you stood up for what you believed was right. I said, but now consider this. There are some people who have a right to ask you to do things. And if you say no, there'll be a consequence. For example, a teacher at school. So I said, choose wisely, but you have our backing we'll always have your back on what choice you make. She is super confident telling somebody no because she learned that as a young person and had the confidence of her parents. Now, it also taught me things too about, my ability to say no. And there are times where it's uncomfortable, but I have to say no. I don't agree with that. I'm not going to go with that. It's never fun or easy or comfortable to tell somebody no, especially somebody who's in that position above you. But I also think that when you say no, if you can put other alternatives on the table, Marcus, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I wouldn't be comfortable doing that, but I have an idea I think will help us. Are you open to that, right? And then we start having that conversation. Hey, if I don't pressure them, I think they're going to buy in time, and I think it's going to give us 3x on what we thought we would get because. And I've got to be good at influencing you at that point after having said no.
And again, it comes back down to intent. If you not being fully committed, then you're not going to execute well. And this, again, we have this problem, I think, because of the urgency that we put ourselves under to transact.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that selling is facilitation of buying. It's not about convincing people that you need my stuff. It's finding people who have a need that you are exceptionally well suited to serve and satisfy, and finding the common ground upon which to build a bridge for them to cross. Our job is to empower them to make a good decision well. It's not to sell them something. If they make that decision, they need to be safe in the decision that if it backfires, not only will you have their back, but you'll have a solution. And if necessary, you'll take the bullet for them. Because that's what service is about. That's why I use the term love deliberately. Because if you lead with love, if you manage with love, if you sell with love, you're not going to put the other person at a disadvantage in order to advantage yourself.
Right. I have a client that early on, when I had stepped away from my corporate role, this client, they actually found me. One of the co-founders had read Cialdini's book, liked everything I shared, started working together. It's been a great client. We hit a point where the VP of sales had built some relationship with him, and he said, "Hey, the way the economy is, I don't see there's any opportunity, at least in the near future, for us to do business." And I said, "That's okay. If you don't mind, I'd like to stay in touch because I enjoy you." And so we stay in touch. When my daughter got married almost 3 years ago, sent him a message about it, some pictures and things. He came back and said, "Oh, that's wonderful. Hey, I'm getting married next year in Germany. Would you and Jane come to the wedding?"
Oh, wow.
So that was our first opportunity to go to Europe, and I'm like, heck yes. And during that time, our relationship tightened even more. And ultimately, I was doing more business with them. Now things are in a trough again. We talked just the other day, and I said, hey, if we never do another piece of business together, I'm okay because this friendship is worth more than that. I said, if we do, awesome. But I know that he understands how much I care about him, how much I care about that organization and wanting to see them do well, that if there's any crack in the door to open it up, he's going to open it up and invite me in because I've built that relationship. I have another client that I just sent off a proposal to. I've known this guy for, gosh, 13, 14 years. And this will be the first opportunity to do business. I didn't cut him off early on because, oh, wow, rejected my first proposal. No, he knows me. He knows my character, timing, budget, all those things have aligned. And he's like, hey, send us the contract. We want to have you out in January to speak to our team. So I don't write people off just because we're not doing business, because I've come to know them and I care for them. And that ultimately translates into positive things for both people.
And tell me this, how much of your time do you actually have to spend prospecting?
I'm really efficient about it. And the way I group it together quarterly, and I have like 4 weeks where I'll do things and I don't just automate stuff. So I'm sending personal email. Now it's the same email, but I'm going to still personalize it to you and others. So it takes time. Um, but I'm able to like really crunch that down. So then I've got massive amounts of time outside of that for content creation, travel, all the things that I need to do. So when I get to April, all 4 weeks in April, I'll be reaching out to probably a couple dozen people a day, Monday through Friday, sending out emails and responding to emails and doing all that. That'll be a big chunk of my time. But I found for me, it works better than just smattering it out all across the year, because I can go on and honestly say, hey, how was the first quarter for you, Marcus? Here's what happened in my first quarter. And by the way, new video, you might want to check that out. So that's how I do mine.
Interesting. Because again, it sounds to me like you typically keep customers for life and they pop in and out as their context allows. And when the common ground is there, you build a bridge and then become a customer again, they refer.
And
So,
and some of those people move on to other organizations. I mean, if they had just seen me as a one and done, wow, I got a nice payday, and never contacted again. But if I'm staying in touch with them to say, hey, you know what, 5 years from now, you may have pretty big turnover in your sales team. We may want to do business together again. Or if you move on to another organization and you thought it was valuable, maybe we bring that in. It's not going to happen if they're not hearing from me at least on a quarterly basis. Where I'm asking how things are going. And the personal side too is, I had one client who had a son who went to Kansas State University to play football. I made sure I asked him, like, hey, how was your son's freshman year playing football? Of course, he's a proud dad. He comes back and he tells me, but we have that personal relationship. It wasn't just a marketing email, it was an email to him.
and this then comes back down to the next couple of things, which after self mastery is relationship mastery. And role mastery comes third. Because if you haven't mastered self and you haven't mastered relationship, then odds are you're going to perform pretty poorly in role anyway.
Mhm.
Um, so, how do we get leadership to stop spending their time, effort, resources, and money and on technique and tactics training, and get them focused on what many would deem soft skills, but the stuff that makes human beings tick?
Mhm. I always tell people that what I teach are not uh, tactics. They're not tips and tricks and things like that. Nobody wants to know that a tactic was used on them or that they were tricked into doing something. But still, a lot of people use those words, and words impact how we think, feel, and behave, right? I tell them I teach principles, right? I've talked about the principles of persuasion or sometimes the principles of influence. People like dealing with individuals who live principled lives, who live by a set of principles. These principles that we talk about, those seven that I shared with you, all human beings across the globe operate by them. Some principles are more effective in certain cultures than others, but by and large, every person across the globe responds to these. If I internalize these, I'm not using the tips and tricks and tactics. I'm understanding how people think and behave, and then I am able to navigate in a situation. I don't have to have a script because I understand that I can move in those. It's kind of like my wife and I have done improv comedy. You never know what's going to be thrown at you. But when you understand the rules of improv comedy, you start to feel very confident when people are throwing out suggestions to just go with it. And the other person knows, and you start working together. So you're not following a script. And I think that if we learn principles, then we can, in a way, be improvisational when we're interacting with people.
Well, again, to have a natural conversation, one must be present and in the moment.
Right.
And I think that too often, because our attention is on the transaction, it's like driving in a skid and looking at the tree or the wall you want to avoid, as opposed to the open road. So, how is it? How can we get people to slow down and actually pay real attention, to be fully present?
I think it's going in with a mindset that says, I want to get to know and like the people that I are my customers, prospects, the people that I work with, vendors that I deal with, right? By taking time to get to know and understand those people, recognizing if nothing else happens, I will probably enjoy my role, my job much more because I'll be able to honestly say, I really like the people that I interact with, right? That choice rests on us more than anything else. If I am interacting with somebody that I really enjoy, I am not glancing at my watch trying to get that over with. I probably stay in that conversation a little bit longer because it's enjoyable and I figure out how I'll flex my schedule to make everything else work. That for me is the key. It's that willingness or that desire to build genuine relationships with people. That tends to slow us down because I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to be genuinely interested in what's going on with you, and you'll probably reciprocate and ask me. And we're going to both leave that conversation saying, you know what, I really like Marcus, and you're saying, I really like Brian. I look forward to the next time we have a conversation together.
I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation. I'm conscious that we're coming close to the end. Tell me this, the research. Obviously, you started with Cialdini's video. What would you suggest if someone really wants to understand themselves and other human beings and why their relationships are so complex? Where would you point them?
Well, I always point people first and foremost to Cialdini's book, Influence. Um, for me, it's one of the top 5 books in my life. I tell people his work didn't just change my career, it changed my life, right? It changed everything I did corporately once I began to learn this. And now obviously I stepped away 6 years ago. It's what I do full time. So it changed my career. But it also changed how I interact with my wife, how we raised our daughter, how we will interact with our grandson, because every single day we are trying to influence people whether or not we think it. I mean, that grandbaby who just came into the world is trying to influence mom and dad every day. He can't say, I'm hungry. He cries. He can't say, I need to have my diaper changed. He cries, but he has a need that he is trying to get met. And so when we accept that fact that we are trying to influence people, why not learn how to do it well so that it's easier for people to say yes to it? We can enjoy the success at the office. We can have a little more peace and happiness at home because there's less resistance. It's more upon us. Can I take the time to learn how people typically think, feel, and behave? Am I willing now to adjust how I communicate to ultimately have those better relationships? To me, it starts with Cialdini's work. He's called the godfather of influence. You will learn the research and everything. Then there are lots of other resources. Like I consider my resources, my books, as the practical application. You want to learn the research, you read Cialdini's book. You want to start seeing some, boots on the ground. How do we put this into practice? That's typically what I focus on with my clients. I'm not a behavioral scientist, a social psychologist. I don't desire to be, but I love what they do, and my mind works in a way that I can see how to translate it into practical things to help people.
And so, what are your books called?
My first book was Influence People, and that is kind of a business psychology, the practical application. Second book is Persuasive Selling, and that takes a look at the sales cycle, personality types, listening skills, but how do you take Cialdini's principles and apply them throughout selling? And then the third book that I wrote was called The Influencer. I did that during COVID, kind of challenging myself. Could I write a book that is a story format, a business parable to teach these principles? Because I know some people will never pick up a sales book or a business psychology. Um, so those are the 3 books that I have that are out there. I am working on a 4th book that should be out by fall. And this was prompted by a question my daughter asked. She heard me speak and she said, Dad, what I want to know is where's God in all this? Where does he fit into this equation of all these things that you teach? And so we started having this wonderful conversation. So the book's called Influence from Above, and it's really about how Cialdini's principles and spiritual principles tie together. Just a simple example. Jesus said it's better to give than receive, right? Reciprocity. So how does Cialdini's principles tie into these timeless principles from spiritual sources like the Bible?
Interesting. A lot of my work has included looking at different faiths, and looking for what the common ground is, where the shared values are. And interestingly enough, I mean, you look at how behavioral science and behavioral psychology, what it's telling us is that there are certain things that throughout history are not going to change. And throughout the history of humanity, relationship has been central, and trust is at the heart of that. And if at any point we do not trust the other person to either do what they say they're going to do, or that there's going to be some surprise, good or bad. One of my favorite quotes came from a chat I had with Charlie Green, who wrote The Trusted Advisor and Trust-Based Selling, fabulous books. And he said, don't under promise and over deliver, because if you do, you've lied to me twice. deliver exactly what you said you're going to. No surprises, because that way the brain doesn't get triggered. What it likes is consistency. You've said it yourself. And we've got to get out of the habit of this selfish me first agenda, not out of anything other than practicality. What works really well with human beings is caring for them and them feeling felt, feeling heard, feeling understood.
Right.
So, in wrapping up, what advice would you give to people who are just embarking on this journey so that they don't end up either misusing it or it backfiring horribly? Because there's always that possibility when you give people new toys.
One simple thing that every listener could do without picking up Cialdini's book, without picking up my book, but just saying, okay, I'm going to give this stuff a test that this guy Brian talked about, would be to focus on that principle of liking, right? Again, the principle says it's easier for you, Marcus, to say yes if you know me and like me, but it's not about me getting you to like me. It's about me doing what I can to get to know and like you. So making the choice to go into situations to say, I'm going to focus on what we have in common. I'm going to ask a lot of questions. When we have something in common, I'm going to talk about that because I know that kind of creates a connection for us. I'm going to choose to look for the good in that other person. And when I see it, I'm going to make sure that I say it because it doesn't do a lot of good for you if I'm not verbalizing what you did and how it positively impacted me, right? So we both win when I do that. If people who are listening will do that, I can guarantee you're not going to have everybody like you, but you're going to have a lot more people who are enjoying interacting with you. And as they enjoy interacting with you, it will become much easier for them to say yes. Now, I'm under no illusion. There's no magic wand. I don't get what I want every time. You know, if we go back to a faith-based thing, Jesus didn't convince everybody of the truth of what he was saying either. So that takes the burden off me. I don't have to bat 1,000% here. But if I can move significantly the number of people who are saying yes that I'm having a positive relationship with, that's a win. And the more I focus on this, the better I get, probably the better my odds are of moving forward, and I'll have this nice upward trajectory.
Brian, we need to wrap up now. How can people get hold of you?
Easiest way would be to reach out on LinkedIn. As I said earlier, I will accept a request from everybody. If you don't put in how you found me, guarantee you're going to get a message that says, how did you find me? Right? It keeps the social media. They're actually having real interaction with me. There's not a bot doing this. I am looking at it every single day, and I'm responding to people who are sending requests to connect or messages. So that would be the number one way. Second way would be to visit the website, which is influencepeople.biz, B-I-Z. People go out there, have been blogging for weekly for more than 15 years, been on almost 200 podcasts, tons of information out there.
Wonderful. Brian Ahearn, thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was great.
Likewise. So this is Marcus Kauke signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you found this useful, then please get in touch with Brian, with me, ask some questions. And if you've got any moments that you'd like to share that you've applied some of this, that would be fantastic. We always want that kind of feedback. In the meantime, if you want to get hold of me, DM me on LinkedIn or Marcus at laughsightinglast.com. In the meantime, stay safe and stay safe.